So let's review some land-based applications of hyperspectral data. In the first session, we briefly mentioned various applications of hyperspectral data and discussed specific sensors of interest. So today, we will provide examples on how those data are used for agriculture, forest health and restoration, invasive species, drought and vegetation monitoring, geologic and microbial mapping, and finally, hazard detection, such as volcanic activity and landslides. In the image on the top, you can visualize various sugarcane varieties with these data. And in the image on the bottom, you can see the San Andreas Fault along a ridgeline. The first example focuses on mapping agricultural crop types. As the global population increases, we face increasing demand for food and nutrition. Remote sensing can help monitor crop types, food availability, and crop health to improve global food security. Multispectral sensors can be limited in their study of agricultural crop characteristics, such as differentiating crop types and their growth stages with a high degree of accuracy and detail. In contrast, hyperspectral data contain contiguous, narrow bands that provide a complete and detailed spectral signature rather than a few data points along a spectrum, and hence can help advance the study of crop characteristics. So for this project, a team of researchers conducted a detailed study of 5 leading world crop types: corn, soybean, winter wheat, rice, and cotton, that occupy 75% of principal crop areas in the United States and 54% in the world. The project was conducted in 7 agroecological zones of the United States, using 99 Hyperion hyperspectral images from 2008 to 2015 at 30-meter spatial resolution. The researchers developed a first-of-its-kind comprehensive Hyperion-derived hyperspectral imaging spectral library of agricultural crops. And these are based on the USDA cropland data layer as reference data. Principal component analysis was used to eliminate redundant bands by using factor loadings to determine which bands most influence the first few principal components. This resulted in the establishment of 30 optimal hyperspectral narrow bands for the study of agricultural crops. In this figure, you can see the differences in reflectance of corn in 2 agricultural zones. And in the images, you can see some of the study team members and the crops that they examined. I also want to note that we have the link here to the publication of this research. For this work, crop types and crop growth stages were classified in Google Earth Engine. As you can see in these multiple Hyperion scenes on the left, and the small classified images of corn, cotton, rice, soybean, and winter wheat. The best overall accuracies were between 75 to 95% in classifying crop types and their growth stages. You can also see the associated spectral signatures of a few of these crop types in the figures on the right to show how the researchers were able to distinguish these crop types based on the reflectance from the hyperspectral images. This research makes a significant contribution towards understanding, modeling, mapping, and monitoring agricultural crops using data from even from upcoming hyperspectral satellites. And these could be from NASA's Surface Biology and Geology mission and contributions in advancing the building of a novel, first-of-its-kind global spectral library of agricultural crops. So this was a really important research activity. In the next example shown here, we highlight a project conducted within NASA's Develop internship program. Here the team used hyperspectral data from AVRIS to monitor wildfire restoration in the Santa Monica Mountains. This region is about 63,000 hectares and lies between Ventura and Los Angeles County here in California. It's located within one of the top 25 global biodiversity hotspots. The area is home to 12 vegetation communities, which include California walnut, California bay laurel, coast live oak woodland, valley oak savanna, and riparian woodland. These vegetation communities provide valuable ecosystem services such as carbon sequestration, slope stability, and temperature moderation, and provides billions of dollars in ecosystem services to the Los Angeles region. The recent Woolsey fire that occurred in November of 2018 has damaged this sensitive area further by burning a large section of this recreation area. The team here worked closely with partners from multiple agencies, including the Resource Conservation District of the Santa Monica Mountains, the National Park Service, the California Department of Parks and Rec, and many others. The project identified locations where woodlands will persist under future climate conditions and built upon past work that mapped existing conditions, as well as burn severity and climate variables. So here you can see the spectral reflectance profiles from various species within the region. Using AVRIS flights, the team was able to differentiate vegetation prior to the Woolsey fire in order to inform managers of the types of species to use for post-fire restoration activities. These spectral profiles were used in a land cover classification map of the region prior to the fire. So here is the final classification map from this project shown here on the left. On the right, you can also see the surface area of each land class. Chaparral was the largest class, followed by coastal sage scrub. You can see the extent of these species in the figure, and then the total area and percent of total class covered in the table on the right. These results were also used in species distribution models under specific climate scenarios to help inform managers of the best species to plant for their restoration activities. Another use for hyperspectral data is for invasive species monitoring and management. Again, the ability to distinguish different species provides an enormous benefit for these types of studies. Perennial pepperweed is an invasive species that typically threatens wetlands, marshes, and estuarine ecosystems by pushing out native species. Densely packed colonies and white flowers help make pepperweed more distinguishable from native vegetation and identifiable with hyperspectral data. This study used HIMAP, which is hyperspectral data that was collected in the San Francisco Bay, Sacramento, San Joaquin Delta estuary of California. And they use this to detect these infestations of pepperweed. HIMAP is an airborne imaging spectrometer that samples the wavelengths of 450 to 2500 nanometers with 128 bands at 15 to 20 nanometers apart. This was commercially produced by the High Vista Corporation, so I don't believe these data are freely available, but it gives you an example of the use of these type of hyperspectral systems. I also wanted to mention that this project too began with the NASA Develop Internship Program and was completed by researchers at UC Davis. And with all of the published examples that we're giving, again, we have the link to the paper here so you can get more information about the specific project. So here's a map that identifies the location of pepperweed in red for one of the study sites examined called Rush Ranch. At Rush Ranch, most pepperweed occurs in a band along the marsh margin. However, pixels of pepperweed were also identified within the marsh proper, and these detections were confirmed using aerial photographs. This is significant because it indicates that pepperweed is invading areas that are unlikely to be detected by traditional ground-based mapping. The profiles on the right show a distinct spectral signature differentiating pepperweed from other vegetation types, with the pepperweed spectral signature noted with the solid black line. The result was the successful identification of invasive infestations in the area. There are limitations, however, and knowledge of the study region and phenological characteristics of these individual species can assist in creating highly accurate maps of invasive species extent. Another example here is for monitoring severe droughts in the Amazon, also done with Hyperion imagery. Some scientists are predicting that El Niño events will become more frequent and severe as Earth's climate warms. Large-scale deforestation and smoke from biomass burning interfere with local cloud formation and rainfall. Identifying the precise signals of drought-stressed forests would benefit the region's farmers, timber operators, fire planners, and conservationists. Being able to detect those changes from a satellite would be a huge advantage, particularly in the Amazon, where it's a very large region and remote and difficult to access on foot in many cases. The other issue, especially in the Amazon, is with clouds. So cloud cover is often prevalent in this region. Additionally, vegetation health indices, like the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, or NDVI, from multispectral imagers like Landsat, can saturate at high biomass levels, which make it really difficult to determine small variations in the health of dense forests like the Amazon. Therefore, with so many wavelengths to choose from with hyperspectral imagery, there's a much better chance of detecting the changes in pigment activity, leaf area, and carbon balance related to drought. So here you can see images indicating the test sites for the test sites that these researchers used for a drought plot and a control plot. And at the control plot, they supplemented with water during a drought period. And this helped them identify differences in vegetation health in 2001, which was a pretty severe drought for this region. I also want to mention that in our demonstration for accessing and displaying Hyperion imagery that we'll have at the end of this session, we're going to be using data from this same region. In this study, the team of researchers showed that Hyperion provided improved estimates of drought in this region. Reflectance was measured in July and November of 2001, that drought year. The use of Hyperion data provided 3 new indicators that could only be made from hyperspectral observations. One that was sensitive to the amount of a chlorophyll helper pigment called xanthophyll, and one that was sensitive to a pigment called anthocyan, and another that was sensitive to water content in the leaves in the forest canopy. These indicators that made use of the new hyperspectral information from Hyperion were much more successful in detecting changes in carbon content brought about by drought stress. The top graph shows reflectance measured by Hyperion at wavelengths between 450 and 1250 nanometers in July with the blue lines, and in November with the orange lines. The forest reflected very little visible light, that from about 450 to 700 nanometers, because that's the type of light that plants generally absorb for photosynthesis. The lower graph shows the visible reflectance in greater detail. Dashed lines show wavelengths used for satellite-based estimates of carbon uptake. green for vegetation greenness, purple for light use efficiency, and red for the activity of anthocyanin, that chlorophyll helper pigment. So the satellite-based calculations of net carbon intake came very close to matching the growth that was measured by the researchers on the ground. Another example is the identification of sulfur deposits high in the Canadian Arctic. So this is a glacier-carved valley that is unlike no other on Earth. Bjorp Ford Pass on Ellesmere Island, shown in the top image, is the only known place where sulfur from a natural spring is deposited over ice. The sulfur leaves a pale yellow stain that almost seems to glow with the hyperspectral data. And here, again, we're talking about Hyperion. At the spring, hydrogen sulfide gas in the water is converted to stable deposits of either elemental sulfur, which is the most common type of material in this deposit, or gypsum. The process by which hydrogen sulfide becomes sulfur is complex and most often occurs when microbes, like bacteria, are present. The very presence of elemental sulfur deposits is also an indicator that life is likely there. So this type of research could help inform scientists about life on other celestial bodies, like Jupiter's moon and Europa, to see if elemental sulfur deposits also contain life. So quite a bit different than our vegetation studies, but also a very unique and interesting application of hyperspectral data here. Okay, so the final example that we'll highlight today involves the ability to map various mineral types. Volcanic rock avalanches and debris flows are potentially deadly natural phenomena, capable of destroying entire communities with little warning. The potential source areas of volcanic debris flows, or unstable rock masses situated high on volcanic edifices, are one of the important considerations for assessing debris flow hazards. Mapping altered rock and the associated structures can aid in the identification of weakened zones on volcanoes that may be prone to catastrophic collapse. However, because such rocks and structures are commonly situated in rugged terrain that's difficult to access, information concerning potential altered rock sources for debris flows is really sparse. Therefore, hyperspectral data from AVRIS and Hyperion were used in this example to map a variety of mineral species on Mount Shasta in California. Here are two mineral classification maps from AVRIS on the left and Hyperion on the right. The maps display various minerals that are highly altered and particularly prone to landslides. The letters on the map indicate places where there were also ground samples collected. There was fairly good agreement between the AVRIS and Hyperion maps. However, the lower signal-to-noise ratio of Hyperion did create some uncertainties in the map. However, having less snow in the Hyperion image provided some benefit as well, as these were taken at different time periods. Comparisons of the imagery and a digital elevation data set acquired from both airborne and spaceborne sensors demonstrates the feasibility for remotely evaluating altered rock masses that indicate potential volcanic debris flow in these regions. So it's another great example of the use of these types of data. So now we will move on to briefly review data access and display before providing you with our short demonstration for today. One of the most useful websites for accessing remote sensing data is the USGS Earth Explorer. And we've talked about this in many of our other trainings as well. And this is what we'll be using to highlight our demonstration of downloading Hyperion data. And I also want to mention that Earth Explorer is used for many other types of data, such as multispectral data as well. So it's a great resource. Within Earth Explorer, you can specify many aspects of your data of interest to narrow your search. These search criteria include things like the data product type, the sensor of interest, the spatial extent, the date range, and the % cloud cover. And we often use a threshold of about 20% for the cloud cover designation to eliminate cloudy scenes that oftentimes are not very useful for this type of analysis. And we've also included the link to Earth Explorer here. In order to download data from Earth Explorer, you will need to sign up for an account through the USGS registration system. And here's a screenshot of what the registration looks like. Once you register, you'll be able to download data, and you'll be notified via email when a request has been received and when a request has been processed. So for today's demo, we'll be using Hyperion data. As we discussed in the first session, Hyperion, one of the most popular hyperspectral satellite systems, was launched in November 2000 and was decommissioned in 2017. The Earth-observing EO1 satellite was planned as a one-year technology demonstration validation mission. After the initial technology mission was completed, NASA and the USGS agreed to the continuation of EO1 data as an extended mission. It collected 220 unique spectral channels ranging from 357 to 2,576 nanometers with a 10 nanometer bandwidth. It has a spatial resolution of 30 meters for all of the bands. And the full data archive are now available online, which is what we'll show you. Hyperion data are available at different processing levels. The higher the processing level, the greater the pre-processing that was conducted on the imagery prior to when the user downloads it. Pre-processing involves radiometrically correcting data to account for differences in the sensor's sensitivity, or the gray levels. For the level 1 GST data, the geometric corrections are derived from spacecraft. And for the level 1T data, ground control points are also used to correct the data. Both the level 1 GST and level 1T data are corrected while employing a 90-meter digital elevation model, or DEM. And this ensures that topographic accuracy are provided within that GeoTIFF format. The level 1R data have further corrections applied, and they are provided in an HDF format. As with most satellite data products, the level 1 processing provides data as radiance. And then additional processing must be done to obtain surface reflectance. And those are the values that are generally used for the spectral analysis. For most multispectral data, this is already done by a processing center. So things like Landsat, for example, you'll obtain a level 2 surface reflectance product, which makes the data a little easier to work with. For Hyperion data, on the other hand, an atmospheric model must be applied by the user. A few of these include the fast line-of-sight atmospheric analysis of spectral hypercubes, or FLASH model, the atmospheric correction now, or ACORN model, and the atmospheric removal program. For many of the atmospheric correction models, you need a more advanced processing software such as ENVI. This figure shows that the application of the FLASH algorithm within the Hyperion imagery in ENVI. The FLASH algorithm can be applied, and then the surface reflectance values can be obtained from the initial radiance values. Then the files can be exported in GeoTIFF formats such as surface reflectance and used in other geospatial software like QGIS or ArcGIS. The application of these atmospheric correction models is a bit beyond the scope of this training, But I wanted to mention it because it's really important to understand that it's a necessary step in the process if you are using hyperspectral data for your work. So we will be doing a demonstration of displaying Hyperion data using QGIS. And you don't need to have this downloaded on your computer or anything for this training. It's just going to be a demonstration of what can be done. But QGIS is a really great free and open source GIS platform that has many remote sensing data processing capabilities. And we've used this in a lot of our other RSET trainings as well. You can download QGIS on a Mac and a PC, and we've included the download link here if you're interested in. Also, a nice feature about QGIS is the ability to install plugins, and there are a few relevant plugins for hyperspectral data. The first is the Spectral Library tool, which creates spectral libraries of multi and hyperspectral data and allows the user to visualize the spectra via plots. The raster data plotting is another tool that adds a panel for creating pixel profile plots as well as scatter density plots for multiple bands. The scatter plot data adapts in real time, so whenever you move the map canvas, the extent changes. So that's a really nice feature as well. And finally, the semi-automatic classification plugin allows for supervised classification of remote sensing images and provides tools for downloading and processing images. It's a really great tool that was featured a few years ago in one of the RSET trainings that we gave, but I'm not sure if it's up to date with the most recent version of QGIS, so that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so now we will move on to the demonstration, which will be given by my colleague, Zach. So Zach, over to you.
All right, thank you, Amber. So I'm gonna go ahead and be walking you all through our Earth Explorer and QGIS demo here. So we're gonna go ahead and start out in Earth Explorer. If you'll remember on one of the previous slides, there's the link to Earth Explorer. This is kind of the main screen that you'll see when you first go to this website. As Amber mentioned, you'll need to register for a login. So it's usually just easiest with Earth Explorer kind of before you start looking at data, before you start looking through the imagery that you're interested in, to go ahead and just log in. That kind of prevents you from reaching any barriers to downloading data, creating a basket where you might want to kind of house all of your bulk downloads, things like that. So I go ahead and recommend just logging into Earth Explorer kind of once you get to this main screen. So now we can get to kind of the data search portion of Earth Explorer. There's a lot of criteria that you can enter for Earth Explorer. I think probably the biggest one that most of you are probably interested in is spatial extent. So we're going to go ahead and just establish kind of a study area that we'll be working with in Earth Explorer. So there's a variety of search criteria that you can use, as I mentioned. You have a lot of options here. You can even upload your own shapefile if you so wish. That's something that you have the option to do. You can use the geocoder to look for specific features. That includes US features, things like states, cities, counties, stuff like that, and then world features as well, which you can use to filter for country, a feature class, feature type, things like that. You also have the option to define an area, kind of using this browser interface that we have here on the side. So we'll go ahead and do some of that. You can define your own polygon, basically adding a coordinate in 4 corners and whatever shape you so desire to create your own polygon. As Amber mentioned, we're going to be using data from the Amazon basin that's from the same project as the case study that we used from the Amazon. So here you can define a specific lat long point. You can get a radius from that, so you can get a circle as your kind of study area there. You can use a predefined area. As I mentioned, you can add your own shape. I think probably the easiest thing to do, especially if you're just looking to browse, is to just use the extent of the map. And so how that works is you kind of zoom in on what you're interested in, and you can just use the map frame. And then as you see here, it will kind of log all of those points for you and provide this square polygon. And so with that, you can kind of manipulate that shape to whatever shape you're interested in. You can extend the spatial range, you can make it a little bit more fine. And then in my opinion, that's probably the easiest way to kind of just start filtering data for spatial extent. So we'll go ahead and do that. You can do a lot of data filtering steps here at the get-go, things like date range, cloud cover, results options, but there's actually a point later on where you can look at additional criteria, and we'll go ahead and go over these steps then. So you can go ahead and go to the next step once you've defined your spatial area, and this is where you select what data sets you're interested in working with. So for our purposes, we're going to be working with Hyperion data, and that can be found here nested under EO1, and you're just going to want to click the EO1 Hyperion checkbox. And so that will just make sure that all of the data that you're seeing is from EO1 Hyperion. And so we'll go ahead and go to additional criteria. And this is where you can specify things like entity ID. That's kind of just using some of the data from satellite imagery capture to go ahead and filter for your results. You definitely have to know a little bit more specific information about what scenes you're interested in working with. So it's not necessarily the easiest input to filter your data. You can also look at processing level of data. As we mentioned, there's 3 level 1 products available for Hyperion. You can go ahead and select one if you're interested in receiving that product in particular. But we're going to go ahead and just leave that on all for our purposes. And then for cloud cover, as we mentioned before, we typically look for images that have no more than 20% cloud cover. So we're going to go ahead and click that less than 20% box right there. You can also define things like path and row if you know exactly where the imagery is located that you're looking for. But for our purposes, this should be a good search, basically defining the spatial extent, picking our sensor, and then making a cloud cover specification as well. So we'll go ahead and start looking at our results. So Earth Explorer will go ahead and filter through all of the Hyperion data and only provide us with data that's available within this spatial extent. So as you can see, there's quite a bit of data here. But we'll go ahead and go up here to the Show Results control. And this is a really nice way to look at the various different footprints of the data. There's a couple options here. We'll go ahead and choose this footprint one. Awesome. So as you can see, these are the Hyperion, oops, went a little too far there. These are the Hyperion overpasses that we have access to kind of within that study area that we defined. So you can see each one of them individually, and they're reflected here. And you can kind of turn these color markers on and off to see exactly where each of these data points lies. So kind of looking at the data that you have available, you'll be able to look at the metadata. So you want to click this little thumbnail image right here. And that'll go ahead and load the metadata for you. It'll give you things like acquisition date. It'll give you cloud cover, target path row, as well as the time that the image was captured. So this is really helpful metadata information that will kind of help you narrow down whether or not this data is important to you. This image in particular is from 2016. And you can also do kind of a standard browse of the imagery where you can just go ahead and take a look at the thumbnail. You can inspect for obvious imagery areas. This is kind of a false color image that you can just go ahead and explore through to see if there's cloud cover, to see if there's missing pixels, maybe some image artifacts that you're not necessarily too keen on for your own data analysis. And kind of once you've determined that the data that you've filtered through is something you're interested in, you can either kind of download one by one. And so you do that with this icon here. And then it will provide you for all of those download options that we went over earlier. And what you'll do if you want this data is you'll just go ahead and click the download button, say for the level 1R product that you're interested in, and that'll just go ahead and directly download into your downloads folder. I'm not going to do any downloads for myself for the next portion of the demo because I already have some level 2 pre-processed data that we're going to be working with for the QGIS demonstration. So I'll go ahead and start moving everything over into QGIS, and we can get started with that portion of the demo. All right, so now that we're here in the QGIS interface, this is kind of the main screen that pops up. You'll see a couple of things that you don't necessarily really need to pay attention to with QGIS. For example, like the news or project templates. We're not going to deal with any of that right now. That's just what you can expect when you first open the application. And so we'll go ahead up to here to the new project button, and we'll just go ahead and click new project. And once we click that button, it'll just kind of populate this new blank project. And then we'll need to go ahead and import our data. And so as a reminder, the data that I'm using has been processed to level 2. That means that it's been processed through atmospheric corrections, and it will be displaying surface reflectance. This is from the same project that we showed the case study for in the Amazon throughout our case study presentation slides. But this data is based off of the level 1 products that we went off of. It's just already gone through that atmospheric correction processing phase. So we're going to go ahead and open the data layer that we're looking for here in the data source manager. And as you can see here, you have options to import a vector data layer, a raster data layer, mesh layer. We're interested in rasters. And as you can see here, I already have preloaded the TIFF that has the level 2 surface reflectance data that we'll be working with from the Amazon basin. But I'll just go ahead and show you real quickly how to navigate to whatever file you're interested in working with QGIS. You'll just go here to the Browse button, and that will take you here to browse through each of your files. And you can go ahead and click on the one that you're interested in working with. In this case, it's a TIFF. And it's the same file that was already preloaded. So we'll go ahead and add that to the project. And you can see there it adds everything in the background. This interface here might not necessarily close. You can just go ahead and close it. And you see here we have the first band, which is the gray band, kind of displayed here within our project. You can see the layer over here displayed similar to if you're used to working with ArcGIS or another GIS platform. You can turn those layers on and off. And we'll just go ahead and zoom here to a clear part of the swath. You can see there's some interference from clouds and other portions of the image, but for the most part, it's relatively cloud-free. And you'll notice that a lot of those cloud pixels get filtered out during the atmospheric correction phase of data processing. But we'll go ahead and zoom in here to kind of this clearer portion of the image. And then what we're going to want to do is go ahead and do an RGB band combination. So that's red, green, blue. And we'll just be picking different bands from this image so that we can create a quasi-true color image that's going to look a lot more like what we would expect. So as I mentioned, this is kind of just showing the gray band for now. It's a nice outline of what's contained within the image. But we'll go over here to the layer styling pane. And if this doesn't open up when you first import the image, you can just go to this button right here and click on that. And that should open this interface for you right here. And so it's pretty easy when you're creating that RGB image. You can kind of just go through and click which bands you're interested in working with. For this data product, we have 196 bands that kind of pass that quality control phase and are useful for the analysis that was done for this project. You can see all of those data, all of those bands displayed here kind of in a 1 through 96 format. And then I have the associated metadata that tells me what wavelength each of these bands corresponds to. So the first, I want to say 70 or so bands correlate to the visible part of the spectrum, and those are the ones that we're going to be interested in working with. And so we'll go ahead and start out with the red band here, which will be band 27 in this case, and that corresponds to around 620 nanometers in wavelength. For our green band, we're going to choose band 20. And this band correlates to around 548 nanometers, around that range. And then for the blue band, we're going to choose band 12, and that band is around 460 nanometers. And so as you can see here, kind of with that combined red, green, blue image, we have a little bit more what we would expect out of a quasi-true color image, close to a true color image that looks more like what we'd expect to see kind of from that satellite. And one thing that I want to note here is that you can kind of play around with these bands to see how the image differs, how certain parts of the image might be highlighted when you change some of these band combinations. So for example, we can start with the green band here. Say we wanted to change that to 16. You can notice that certain areas that are vegetated change in color and are highlighted. And that's just because depending on the vegetation species, there's going to be a different band that potentially is reflected more frequently by that type of vegetation. So for example, if you wanted to change that to 22, you could see again, it looks a lot more like the original image that we created, but you just have those options there to kind of mess around with the bands and see what type of land cover types you might be able to kind of highlight just by doing some simple experimentation with the bands. And so we're going to go ahead and I went ahead and put that back to kind of our original quasi-true color image. And on top of that, you'll be able to use the value tool in QGIS. This is a plugin that's really easy to install on your machine. And I'll go up here to the plugins manager. So you can click here in this tab, manage and install plugins. And then you can just do a quick search after it's done connecting to the plugin manager. You can see there's 629 plugins currently available for this version of QGIS. And if you were interested in the value tool, you just have to type it in here in the search bar. It'll pop up and it's pretty easy to just install really quickly in your interface in QGIS. But we'll go ahead and enable the value tool. And this is going to allow us to start exploring the image pixel by pixel, looking at different spectral profiles across the image. And so we'll go here to the graph, and I'll just go ahead and set a quick max and min. This changes the maximum and minimum in the plot for the y-axis, which is surface reflectance in this case. And the only reason I'm doing that is to just make that first portion of the bands a little bit easier to view. Like I mentioned, we're really just interested in kind of that first half of the bands, which display the visible part of the spectrum that we're really interested in working with. So I went ahead and changed that, and then we're going to go ahead and just toggle over here to the image. It'll take a second to load. Okay, awesome. And so when we toggle over different portions of the image, we can see different spectral profiles populating in the first 80 or so bands that we're really interested in working with, like I mentioned. You can see here, if you toggle over different parts of the image, you'll see different spectral responses, different spectral profiles. So we have a very heavily forested area here, and the spectral profile of that has its own kind of distinct shape to it. And then we can go over here to some more bare surface, different types of land cover, and we can see how that spectral profile changes. And then we can even toggle over, say, this river area and see kind of what the reflectance looks like in the water itself. So this is a really cool way to go ahead and start exploring what spectral profiles you can expect from your imagery, whether or not there's a way to differentiate between different, say, vegetation types based off of that spectral profile. That's definitely something that you can get a little bit more in depth with, but for the purposes of this training, we just wanted to show you a really quick and easy way to go ahead and start exploring what some of those spectral profiles look like. And with that, I think I'll go ahead and hand it back over to Amber. Amber, back to you.
Thank you, Zach, for that great demonstration. And in summary for today's session, we highlighted many of the land-based applications of hyperspectral data. These applications focus on the primary benefits of hyperspectral data, including the ability to differentiate between vegetation species, which can be useful for things like agriculture, forest health and restoration, invasive species, and so much more. And the ability to distinguish between small differences in vegetation health and chlorophyll content, which can be used for drought or forest health, and can help in the identification of mapping mineral deposits, which can be useful for identification of hazards, especially with things related to landslides. We also discussed how hyperspectral data can be accessed via the data portal Earth Explorer. However, it's really important to remember that processing is required to account for influences such as geometric and atmospheric, and most of the data are available as radiance, which necessitates the conversion into surface reflectance prior to generating those spectral signatures. So these are some things to keep in mind when using hyperspectral data. And then finally, we demonstrated how to access and visualize Hyperion data.